I'm Detective Pierce. Most people imagine my job as a series of bright offices, sharp suits, and quick confessions under a hanging lamp. They imagine clear clues, clean endings, and villains who look like villains. That has never been my reality. My work has always lived in the quiet places, the forgotten hallways, the roads no one watches, the businesses that never make the news unless something goes very wrong. This is the case of the long-haul truck stop. And it started, like most of them do, with something that seemed insignificant. It was just after 2 in the morning when the call came through. The kind of hour when even the city starts to feel embarrassed for still being awake. A highway patrol officer had sent in a soft request for a detective, not urgent enough to trigger alarms, not recorded as an incident yet, technically not even a report. Just a concern. An out-of-the-way truck stop about 20 miles outside city limits had phoned it in. The clerk had claimed something wasn't right, though they struggled to articulate what exactly that meant. There was no robbery, no disturbance, no confirmed crime. Just a feeling. I've learned not to ignore those. Truck stops are strange ecosystems. They're not part of any town, but they're also never empty. They're limbo spaces. Temporary worlds full of people passing through, trading small talk and bad coffee before disappearing into the dark again. And because nobody really stays, nobody really belongs. Which is exactly why bad things sometimes choose places like that to grow. I grabbed my coat, my notebook, and the older flashlight I preferred over the department-issued one. I never trusted equipment that blinked politely before dying. A good flashlight either worked or it didn't. Outside, rain whispered against the pavement, light and steady, mist rising where tires had passed. The city behind me went quiet as I drove out, buildings thinning, lights stretching farther apart, until the road itself starts to feel like a narrow thread holding you to civilization. After 15 minutes, the GPS signal faded entirely. That didn't surprise me. The highway cut through open land like a wound that never healed. No houses. No overpasses. Just black fields on either side and the endless hum of wheels passing at high speed. Somewhere out there, the truck stop glowed like a dying ember. When it finally appeared, it looked smaller than I expected. A low building shaped like a crooked rectangle, faded signage crackling in tired neon. The letters on the sign flickered inconsistently. All-night diner, gas, showers, parking. Only the word, diner, burned solid. Everything else blinked like it was losing the fight. Several trucks were parked in uneven rows off to the side, their massive forms sleeping under the glow of dull yellow floodlights. A few engines still ticked as they cooled down, soft metallic sounds echoing in the wet night like quiet breathing. I parked away from the main cluster and stepped out into the smell of gasoline, damp asphalt, and old grease. The building's windows were clouded with grime. Inside, fluorescent lights spilled out in a pale rectangle that felt too clean for a place like this. The door chimed weakly as I pushed it open. The air inside was warm and thick. Coffee. Bacon grease. Cleaning solution. The smell of worn upholstery and damp clothes. A dozen scents layered into something uniquely truck stop. The diner was nearly empty. 4 booths lined the wall to the left. 2 were vacant. One held a trucker slouched over coffee, cap pulled low, shoulders wide as the booth's seat allowed. The other contained a woman with blonde hair cropped short, hands wrapped around a mug, eyes unfocused and distant. At the counter, a man in a stained apron wiped at the same spot as if repetition might erase a lifetime of use from the surface. He wasn't young, and he wasn't old either. The kind of face that time hadn't decided what to do with yet. Behind him, the open kitchen glowed sterile and empty, save for the faint hiss of a grill left on out of habit. The clerk stood near the register. Mid-30s. thin, tired eyes. His posture said he hadn't slept right in years. He noticed me immediately. Straightened. Swallowed. I didn't flash a badge. In places like this, that only makes people nervous. I ordered coffee. He poured it without asking how I took it and slid the cup across the counter. His fingers shook just slightly. Not fear exactly. Something else. I took a seat at the bar instead of a booth. Sometimes people talk easier when they're not facing you directly. For a minute, we let silence sit between us, broken only by the soft crackle of the grill and the occasional cough from the man in the booth behind me. Then I spoke. "What's going on here?" The clerk hesitated. "I've worked here 6 years," he said finally. "Long enough to know how things usually look. Long enough to notice when they don't." I sipped the coffee. It was terrible. Hot and bitter in a way that suggested it tried too hard. "What doesn't look right?" He glanced toward the windows. Then toward the parking lot beyond them. Then back at me. "Some of the same guys keep coming through. Same faces. Same trucks. Same orders." I waited. He shook his head. "At first, I thought it was coincidence. Regular routes. People repeat schedules. That happens. But then I started paying attention. Real attention." I leaned an elbow on the counter. And they don't get tired," he said quietly. "They don't age. They don't change. They don't do anything different. Ever." The sentence hung strangely in the air. The diner didn't go silent. It didn't grow ominous. The grill kept hissing. A truck passed by outside with a low growl. But something in the room felt subtly bent out of shape. "Which ones?" I asked. He nodded toward the man in the booth behind me. "Number 1, he murmured. I turned my head slightly without fully looking. The man sat hunched, large and still. His coffee cup was untouched. Steam curled upward in thin lines, but his hand hadn't moved since I'd walked in. "How long's he been there?" The clerk checked the old clock above the door. 2 hours. "No refills?" "None." I stood slowly and walked past the booth as though headed for the restroom. I didn't look at him directly at first. I let my peripheral vision do the work. He was breathing. Chest rising in slow, steady rhythm. His face looked normal enough. Stubble jaw. Rough skin. Heavy eyelids half lowered like he might be fighting sleep. But his eyes weren't blinking. I came back to the counter. "And the woman?" The clerk swallowed. "She comes in every Wednesday. Same time. Orders the same thing. Pays an exact change. Sits there until her food goes cold. Then leaves. Always alone?" He nodded. "And how long's this been happening?" He thought. "Maybe 8 months. Maybe longer. Time blends together here." I believed him. I asked for the security system. He led me into the back office, a narrow room stuffed with filing cabinets, old equipment, and a single monitor displaying 4 camera feeds, parking lot, counter, diners, and fuel pumps. I watched the man in the booth through the screen. He hadn't moved. Not even a shift in posture. "Does he ever?" I asked. "Not while I'm looking," the clerk replied. I studied the feed. Nothing strange jumped out. No flicker. No distortion. Just a man sitting in a booth at a truck stop at 2 in the morning. Sometimes the most unsettling thing about a place is how normal it insists on being. Another chime sounded out front. Someone else walked in. The clerk and I shared a look. We stepped back into the diner. A new trucker stood by the door shaking rain from his jacket. Taller than the others. Dark hair. Narrow face. He walked directly to the counter and ordered coffee without glancing at a menu. Then he glanced at me. Not casually. Not politely. Deliberately. His eyes lingered half a second too long. Then he offered a thin smile. That's when I felt it. Not danger. Recognition. The kind you get when someone else realizes you don't belong somewhere, and they're trying to decide what to do about it. I nodded once in return, neutral. He took his cup and sat in the empty booth opposite the unmoving man. Sat directly across from someone who hadn't moved in 2 hours. He placed his coffee down. And waited. Didn't drink it. Didn't check his phone. Didn't look around. Just sat. Waiting. I glanced back at the clerk. His face had drained of color. They do that, he whispered. Sometimes. What happens next? I don't know. I've never stayed long enough to see. That was when I realized something else. No one in the diner was speaking. No clinking silverware. No low conversation. No radio playing in the back like most places keep it going through the night. Just breath. And the grill. And the slow ticking of the clock. The silence wasn't natural. It was waiting for something too. I went back to my seat at the counter and watched the booth from the corner of my eye. The woman lifted her mug and took her first sip since I'd arrived. The man across from the unmoving trucker leaned forward slightly. Not to speak. Just to be closer. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't about coincidence. It wasn't about routine. It wasn't about strangers drifting through the same place again and again. Something else was happening here. Something that didn't care whether anyone noticed. Something that only needed one thing to continue. That was when the man in the booth finally moved. Just one finger. Pressing lightly against the table. As if testing whether it was still real. The man in the booth moved again, slowly this time, as though remembering how joints were supposed to work rather than simply obeying them. His hand slid across the table toward the coffee cup that had long gone untouched, and for a second I thought he would finally drink it. Instead, his fingers stopped just short of the handle and rested there, hovering like he had forgotten what the object was meant for. Across from him, the newcomer did not react. He remained perfectly still, hands folded loosely in front of him, posture straight but not tense. He looked less like someone waiting for food and more like someone waiting for permission. The woman in the other booth took another slow sip of her drink, her gaze fixed on nothing in particular. Her face showed no emotion, not boredom, not fatigue, not curiosity. It had the vacant calm of someone who was awake only in body but not in mind. I took another drink of my coffee without tasting it and studied the room in pieces. The clock above the door ticked loudly now, each second stretching wider than the last. The fluorescent lights hummed just enough to be noticeable, a thin sound that seemed to fill every empty space between thoughts. Outside, engines idled low and steady like distant animal breathing. The place didn't feel empty. It felt paused. I stood and moved toward the restroom, not because I needed it, but because I wanted a new angle. The mirror above the sink showed a detective who looked as tired as I felt. Rain clung to my hair. My eyes were dark in the harsh lighting. Behind me in the reflection, the hallway to the diner flickered briefly as someone passed through it. When I turned, there was no one there. I returned to the counter. The clerk avoided my eyes. His hands were busy again, wiping at a place already shining clean. The man in the booth lifted his head. Not quickly. Not as though startled. Slowly, as though emerging from heavy water. His eyes were open now. And they were empty. Not in a dramatic way. Not hollow sockets or anything dramatic. Just unfocused, glassy, detached from the face beneath them like they had been installed incorrectly. The newcomer leaned in slightly, his head tilting as if listening for something the rest of us couldn't hear. The man finally grasped the handle of his cup. He lifted it. The coffee inside had gone dark and still. No steam rose from it anymore. When he sipped, his lips barely moved, like they were remembering a gesture rather than performing it. The woman across the room stood. She placed her mug on the table without finishing it and walked toward the door. No one tried to stop her. As she passed the men at the booth, her eyes flicked toward them briefly. Not with interest. With awareness. Then she left. The bell chimed softly behind her. Outside, her figure moved away from the building with unsettling precision, each step identical to the last, until darkness erased her completely. The man finished his sip, set the cup down, and then he smiled. Not wide. Not threatening. Just enough to tell me something was wrong. The newcomer leaned closer. Close enough that their faces were hardly a foot apart. I stood and moved my hand toward my coat. Not to draw attention. Just to be ready. That's when the man finally spoke. Not loudly. Not clearly. But enough that the diner heard. It was a single word. One I would pretend for much longer than I should that I hadn't understood. The newcomer closed his eyes for a moment, as if acknowledging something inevitable. Then he stood. He straightened his jacket. And walked toward the door. No rush. No emotion. He pushed through the entrance and disappeared into the rain. The man in the booth slumped forward. His body collapsed without drama, sliding sideways against the vinyl seat and tumbling onto the diner floor like an object rather than a person. The sound of his skull hitting the tile was soft. Wrong. Final. The clerk shouted. The second trucker bolted from his booth. I was already moving. I checked for a pulse. There was none. The skin was cooling too fast. This just happened, the clerk said, voice shaking. He was sitting. I didn't answer. I watched the door instead. Rain soaked the parking lot. Headlights cut narrow tunnels through the mist as trucks passed on the highway beyond. The newcomer was gone. No footprints remained near the door. Not because the rain washed them away. Because there had never been any. I stood and moved toward the cameras. The clerk followed behind me, pale and quiet. The monitors blinked softly. On screen, the diner scene replayed from the parking camera. The woman leaving. The man standing. The collapse. Then the frame shifted to the entrance. The newcomer walked outside. Stopped for a moment under the awning where the camera could see him clearly. And then, the image glitched. Only for a second. When it corrected, the entrance was empty. He didn't walk away, the clerk whispered. I rewound the footage. Played it slowly. Frame by frame. There was no final step. No movement toward the parking lot. No shift in surrounding air. He had been present. Then he hadn't. No van. No car. No departure. Just absence. The feed rolled forward to live again. Silence thickened the room. I turned back toward the diners. The trucker who had fled now stood outside in the rain, smoking with trembling hands. The clerk leaned on the counter like his legs no longer trusted him. The body lay where it had fallen. Still. Too still. I knelt beside it again. The man's face had lost its expression entirely. He no longer appeared asleep. Or unaware. He looked like an object. A shell. I found no wounds. No blood. No signs of violence. Just a man whose life had quietly been switched off. An ambulance arrived half an hour later. Then patrol. Then paperwork. The trucker gave a statement that contained more fear than facts. The clerk stammered through his own. No one could describe the newcomer clearly. Dark hair. Tall. Plain. The kind of man no one remembers until they desperately try. The body was taken away under a plastic sheet. The floor was cleaned. The coffee thrown out. The grill shut off. The diner returned to something that resembled normal. But nothing felt finished. I stepped back outside alone. The rain had lightened. Fog drifted in low sheets across the lot. The trucks idled in place, running like patient beasts waiting for a signal. I noticed something then. 3 rigs. Same color. Same markings. Same faded logo on their sides. Parked in a row. Engines silent. No lights inside. No drivers in sight. They hadn't moved since I'd arrived. I walked toward them slowly. Each step felt heavier than the last. When I reached the doors, I touched the handle of the nearest cab. Cold. Unlocked. Empty inside. The second one looked the same. The third as well. No belongings. No food wrappers. No clothing on the seats. Not even the faint impression of someone having sat there. The trucks were immaculate. Not new, but untouched. Like props that had never been used. Behind me, the diner lights buzzed faintly. I turned to look. And for just a moment, every person inside was standing. Not talking. Not moving. Just standing. Facing the windows. Facing me. I blinked. And they were seated again. Laughing. Eating. Pouring coffee. The normal illusion had snapped back into place. But my skin didn't forget what it had felt like when it broke. I stepped away from the trucks and returned to my car. I didn't leave yet. Not until I wrote one thing in my notebook. Something I wasn't ready to accept aloud. The people here weren't passing through. Something else was. And it was taking something with it every time it stopped. I stayed in the car long after the red and blue lights vanished down the highway. Rain tapped softly against the windshield, a rhythm that tried and failed to calm the tight knot in my chest. The truck stop glowed in front of me the way it always had, cheerful from a distance, harmless in outline. Through the glass, I could see movement again, people eating, a waitress carrying plates, coffee being poured. From the outside, nothing about that place suggested death. But I had seen the moment the illusion cracked. I had watched a man disappear without moving. I turned the engine back on and drove a short distance down the highway until the building became a small yellow square in the side mirror. Then I stopped again. Not because I was afraid of returning, but because something in my gut told me if I did too quickly, I wouldn't notice what mattered. Patterns don't reveal themselves when you're rushing. I took out my notebook and went over every detail again in my head. Same customers. Same trucks. Same schedules. People who did not change. And one man who dropped where he sat as if something inside him had simply been taken. I started the engine again. But this time, I didn't head back to the city. I drove away from it. The next truck stop was nearly 30 miles east. Larger. Brighter. Fully staffed. I pulled in just before 4 in the morning. The lot was crowded with big rigs and delivery vans, engines rumbling low like distant thunder. Inside, the place buzzed with late-night life, tired voices, clinking plates, the shrill laughter of someone who had gone too long without sleep. The smell of fried food hit me immediately, hot and heavy. Normal. I ordered coffee and sat near the window. Nothing seemed off. I waited. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. I paid and left without speaking to anyone. Another 40 miles took me to a third stop. This one was smaller. Older. Closer in style to the first. The sign outside flickered in a familiar, uneven way. Inside, the room was half full. I took a seat. And waited. 10 minutes in, I saw him. Same face. Same posture. Same jacket. Sitting in a booth near the wall. Drinking coffee he never finished. I didn't approach him. Not yet. I stayed where I was and observed. Everything the clerk at the first stop had said was true. The man didn't fidget. Didn't stretch. Didn't react to sound. When a waitress passed, he didn't look up. When another customer laughed too loudly, he didn't flinch. Eventually, someone took the booth across from him. Not by accident. The newcomer chose it deliberately, even with empty tables nearby. And once he sat, the same pattern unfolded. No drinking. No talking. No movement. The air around them felt wrong. Not heavy. Not cold. Just thinner. Like it had been filtered too many times. I did not wait for the ending this time. I paid and walked out before my nerves could talk me out of leaving. But I didn't drive away. I parked across the street, engine off, and watched. 41 minutes later, the booth emptied. But when the men stepped outside, only one of them walked away. The other never exited. I rewound the memory again and again. I could picture the door opening. I could imagine him stepping forward. But in reality, he had simply stopped existing between door and darkness. By sunrise, I had visited 5 more stops. 3 of them had the same faces, the same trucks, the same quiet booth rituals. The pattern was no longer vague. This was not coincidence. This was not chance. Someone, or something, was feeding off a system built entirely around motion. And that system had no reason to notice when a few pieces vanished. I checked vehicle records just after dawn. Most of the license plates attached to the repeated trucks came up registered. But they hadn't been renewed in years. No updates. No accidents. No service records. No new ownership. Just data that stopped mid-story. Then I found something worse. 2 of the plates didn't exist at all. Issue numbers that were never assigned. Ghost identifiers. The trucks were real. But only in the way a hollow shell is real. By mid-morning I had names. Not real names. Not officially. But names attached to the faces. I searched missing persons databases for patterns that matched my own, men who worked alone, traveled often, and had no recent digital activity. The lists were long. Too long. But there was a type. Same age range. Same physical build. Same background professions. Drivers. Delivery workers. Night couriers. Men and women whose absence could take weeks to notice. People who existed most fully between departure and arrival. By the end of the day, I had something I hadn't wanted to find. A cluster. Dozens of disappearances. All in a line that followed the highway. Not just any highway. The one that passed that first truck stop. I drove back there just after sunset. The place hadn't closed. Of course it hadn't. It looked unchanged. But when I walked through the door, different faces filled the booths. Fresh ones. New shapes. New voices. The clerk looked older. I ordered coffee again. Waited. Nothing. No repeating customers. No quiet figures. No frozen eyes. Just a diner. Just a place on the road. Had it all been a fluke? I almost laughed at the thought. Then I noticed the window. At the far end of the lot. 3 trucks were missing. The same ones I had seen the night before. Their parking spots had been washed clean by rain. No oil stains. No tire imprints. Like they had never been there at all. I leaned closer to the glass. Beyond the edge of the lot, past the floodlights and the dumpsters, I saw another glow in the distance. Faint. Low. Too faint to belong to the city. Another truck stop. I finished my coffee without tasting it, and got back into my car. That second stop in the distance wasn't on any map. My GPS showed nothing between the diner and open land. No business. No service station. No recognized structure. But the light remained steady ahead. I drove toward it. The closer I got, the wronger it felt. The air thickened. The road narrowed unnaturally. And when the glow finally revealed itself, I realized the building was not new. It was the same. Same faded sign. Same broken letters. Same crooked entrance. It was the same truck stop. Copied. Rebuilt. Or relocated in a way my mind didn't want to accept. I parked across the road and didn't move. Not immediately. Because this one didn't look empty. This one looked busy. Too busy. Trucks were lined up tightly, their headlights off, cabs glowing faintly from within. Inside the diner, every booth was full. Every stool at the counter was taken. Every table occupied. But there was no sound. Not a single movement through the windows. No eating. No talking. No pouring. Just people sitting. Motionless. Facing forward. Waiting. I didn't go inside. Not like last time. I circled the building instead. And that's when I saw the back door. It wasn't locked. It wasn't even fully shut. A soft yellow light spilled from within like breath from something sleeping. I placed my hand on the metal and felt it vibrating gently. Not from machinery. From pressure. Like something enormous was pulsing steadily on the other side. I didn't open it. Not yet. I backed away slowly. Returned to my car. And in the rearview mirror, the light went out. The building vanished. Not melted. Not faded. Just gone. Replaced by open dark fields. The highway stretched quiet and empty again. No sign. No parking lot. No trucks. Only darkness. And deep inside me, something else settled into place. A truth I could no longer avoid. The stops weren't random. They weren't feeding grounds. They were transitions. And whatever had taken those people was not finished. I did not return to the city that night. I knew better than to walk into a station and explain what I had seen with nothing but a notebook and a look I no longer trusted in my own reflection. Whatever this thing was, it didn't live in evidence folders. It lived in patterns, and patterns died in windowless rooms under fluorescent lights. So I kept driving. I followed the highway as it cut through the countryside, past dark farmland and long fences that hadn't been repaired in years. Radio signals broke apart into static halfway between stations. Cell service vanished entirely. My phone became just another dark rectangle on the dash. I drove until exhaustion crept up behind my eyes and I began to mistake shadows for movement. That was when I saw the glow again. Another truck stop. Another impossible one. It did not flicker. It burned steady and strong, a wound of yellow light torn into a road that was otherwise empty. This one looked newer. Cleaner. The sign above it read nothing at all. No letters. No promise of food or fuel. Just blank metal framed in tired red neon. I pulled off the road and parked far away from the building. Far enough that I could see the place clearly, but not close enough to feel invited. A single truck sat near the pumps. Engine running. Cab glowing dim. No driver. I waited. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. The engine continued to idle. No one emerged. No movement from inside the diner. When I finally stepped out of my car, the night air felt colder than it should have. Heavier. The silence was absolute. Not the quiet of countryside. Not the hush of sleeping towns. This was an artificial stillness. The kind that falls when all natural sound has been removed one layer at a time. I approached slowly. Every instinct begged me to turn back. But I had already crossed whatever line exists between a man who wonders and a man who knows too much. The doors opened automatically. No chime greeted me. No warmth. Just air. Thin and sterile. Inside, every table was occupied. Every booth full. But none of the people were alive in the way the living are alive. They sat upright. Still. Eyes open. Hands folded on tabletops. None were slumped. None appeared asleep. They looked like statues that had been made too well. I walked between them. No one turned. No one blinked. Some wore jackets. Some wore uniforms. I passed a postal carrier, a construction worker, a delivery driver, a nurse. People from different worlds ending in the same seat. At the far end of the diner stood something that resembled a counter. Not exactly one. More like a suggestion of what a counter should be. Behind it, the wall curved instead of flattening. As I drew closer, I realized the depth of the space behind it did not match the size of the building. The geometry was wrong. Not in a dramatic sense. Just enough to provoke nausea if stared at too long. I smelled something faint in the air. Not decay. Not food. Warm dust. Like the inside of an electrical transformer. I reached the counter. And then I heard it. Breathing. Slow. Massive. Not loud. But omnipresent. Like the building itself was inhaling through unseen lungs. I stood there long enough that my legs began to ache from the stillness. When I finally moved, it was only a few inches forward. That was when the rusted door at the back of the room opened. Not outward. It slid sideways. Soundlessly. A darker darkness waited behind it. Not black. Not void. Something thicker. Something occupied. I did not step through. Something stepped out instead. Not all the way. Just enough that I understood its scale. The air changed instantly. Pressure built. The lights dimmed. Several of the seated figures twitched at once as though responding to an unseen signal. The breathing deepened. I felt it inside my ribs. Inside my throat. Like something inhaling through me. I backed away without rushing. Slow. Careful. Because I knew somewhere in my bones that if I turned and ran, it would follow. I reached the door. The outside light poured back into the diner, as if in relief. Cold air rushed over my skin and burned my lungs like something real again. The doors slid shut behind me instantly. Not slowly. Not reluctantly. With purpose. I stumbled into my car and locked the doors even though I knew it made no difference. I did not look back immediately. I didn't want to see if the building had vanished again. I didn't want to see if it was still there. I started the engine. And drove. Without direction. Without destination. The road stretched endlessly ahead. No exits. No side streets. Nothing. Mile after mile passed and still, the night refused to change. I kept driving until exhaustion became a physical ache. Until my hands went numb against the wheel. Until the edges of my vision darkened in pulses. And then, the road ended. Not at a cliff. Not at a barricade. Just stopped. Open dirt. No asphalt. No shoulder. The highway simply ceased to exist. I brought the car to a slow halt. Ahead of me, another glow. But this one was different. Not bright. Not inviting. It was faint. Unstable. Like something flickering under several layers of reality. The building beyond it was a wreck. Collapsed roof. Broken windows. Twisted pumps. The sign was shattered and unreadable. The diner was not operating anymore. It was dead. And I knew, without knowing why, that this one was not a place people entered. It was a place things were abandoned. I stepped out. Walked through tall grass toward it. The wind carried no sound. Not even my own footsteps. Inside, the building smelled like dust and old rain. The booths were overturned. Chairs shattered. The floor was torn apart in places as though something enormous had scraped against it repeatedly. And in the center of the diner floor, a hole. Not torn open. Not blasted. Compressed inward. Like the ground itself had bowed beneath weight no structure could survive. I approached carefully. And peered down. There was no visible bottom. But I felt something below. Not watching. Not waiting. Sleeping. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I startled hard enough that it nearly flew from my hand. No signal bars. But a notification. No app name. No timestamp. Just text. You are too close to the exit. My throat tightened. Then another message appeared. This place is not for you. The screen went black. Every light in the building died at once. And something beneath the floor took a breath. The breath did not come from below the floor. It came from everywhere at once. From the cracked ceiling. From the walls. From inside my own chest. The building responded as if it were alive in the simplest and most terrifying way imaginable. It inhaled. Dust lifted from the floor in soft spirals. Loose scraps of paper slid several inches across the tiles without touching anything. The air pressure changed so quickly my ears popped and rang like bells struck under water. I staggered backward toward the door, but the entrance was no longer where I remembered it. The rectangular shape was gone. In its place stood a warped curve of concrete and twisted metal that on some level resembled a door frame, but no longer led anywhere that could be described as outside. I turned in place slowly. The diner was not just abandoned. It was wrong. The dimensions of the room stretched without warning. Booths appeared farther away than they should have been. The ceiling rose and fell in sections like ribs under skin. Every movement I made seemed delayed by half a second, as if the air itself needed time to decide whether it would allow me to exist inside it. The hole in the floor tightened. That is the only word that makes sense. Not collapsed. Not closed. It tightened. Like a fist. The sound beneath it was no longer breathing. It was dreaming. How do you hear something dreaming? I can't explain it in terms of sound. It felt like the atmosphere grew crowded with thoughts that were not mine. Images pressed against the inside of my skull. Headlights lining miles of burned road. Engines packed fender to fender beneath a sky that never brightened. The outline of the same truck stopped repeating endlessly, each copy more decayed than the last. The idea that the road itself was not a path, but an artery. And whatever slept beneath this place was part of something larger. Something that had never been built. Just always was. A voice entered my thoughts. Not spoken. Not heard. Transferred. This road is not meant to end. My hands shook violently. Not from fear alone. From understanding. These truck stops were not businesses. Not structures. Not even locations. They were arteries. Rest points along a circulation system that did not serve people at all. They existed because people stopped moving. Because exhaustion and loneliness and bad decisions eventually formed patterns. Enough stranded souls together built something. Like pressure forming coal. Only these places did not form fuel. They formed stomachs. Collectors. Processing stations. The voice returned. You were not supposed to see this place dead. I swallowed hard. My mouth was dry. My tongue felt like paper. I did not ask, "What are you?" because the answer was already coiled inside my brain like a living wire. And I did not ask, "Why me?" because it was never just me. I happened to be one of the few who followed the pattern without becoming part of it. This thing never hunted. It waited. People came to it naturally. Every duct-taped suitcase. Every overheated engine. Every night drive when the human mind finally surrendered somewhere between mile markers. The pressure in the room increased. Not crushing. Guiding. The hole in the floor began to glow faintly. Not with light. With depth. I could feel distance. Not see it. But feel the drops stretching far beyond physical measure. My body drifted forward several inches without permission. Like gravity reversed for just one part of the room. The voice was no longer distant. It filled me from inside my bones outward. You should have turned around. I reached into my jacket with shaking hands. And pulled out the notebook. The torn pages were damp with sweat. Shaking violently, I dropped it into the hole. I do not know what I expected to happen. Destruction. Absorption. Silence. Instead, the notebook floated. Suspended over nothing. The pages opened themselves. Every word I had written ignited into pale white light. The air changed instantly. The pressure broke. Not violently. Like a bubble popping inside a lung. The building screamed. Not in sound. In structure. Cracks tore through walls. Ceiling panels warped and peeled open. The floor vibrated beneath my feet as if something enormous were shifting uncomfortably in sleep. The voice broke into overlapping layers. Not pain but confusion. These are not your memories. I felt the pull loosen. The hole began to unravel inward, its edges softening like heated plastic. The glow faded. The room shuddered once. Then twice. Then the world snapped. I woke face down in gravel. My mouth tasted like copper and old rain. The sky was light gray. Early morning. Real morning. Not the eternal night of the road. The destroyed diner was gone. No hole. No rubble. No broken sign. No scar where it had ever existed. Only an overgrown field. Highway behind me. Sun trying to cut through clouds. My car sat 30 feet away with its driver's door open. Empty. Alive. I staggered to my feet and checked my phone. No messages. No notifications. No record of anything at all. Except for one image. A photograph taken automatically at exactly 3:17 a.m. It showed my car parked in front of a burning yellow glow in empty darkness. No building. No sign. Just light. And on the glass of my windshield, a reflection. Not my face. Something vast. Out of focus. Wrong. I deleted the photo immediately. Then I started driving. I never returned to the city. Never walked into a station. Never submitted those notes to anyone who would file them under unexplained. Because I understood something that no report could ever contain. You cannot document roads like this. You can only escape them. I took smaller highways. Refused night driving whenever possible. Slept in towns instead of cars. If I saw neon in places where darkness should own the land, I turned around. No exceptions. And sometimes, very late at night, when the wind is low and the house is too quiet, I swear I can still hear engines idling somewhere beneath the world. Waiting. The road did not end that night. It simply learned my name.